I have papers like right there. And I didn't write down on my papers what I wrote on your papers, so I had to steal one of them. So I think we should have enough.
I got one.
What do you got? You got one?
Alrighty. Oh, one more week in Daniel. I will tell you our books are in. They're at my house, safely tucked away. I'll bring them next week. And I went ahead and ordered book 1 and book 2. This will actually take us through either the last Thursday of June or the first Thursday of July, depending if we take like a week off to like clear our heads and breathe a little bit. But so if you guys have vacations and all that and we need to take time off, that's fine. We have lots of time to get through Ezekiel. So, alrighty, chapter 10, actually chapter 9. Let's look back at chapter 9. What is the time phrase of chapter 9, verse 1?
Third?
Nope. Chapter
First.
9, verse 1.
First year.
The first year of who?
Neb.
Cyrus.
Nope. Chapter 9.
Chapter
Darius.
9.
Darius. Of
Okay.
Darius, yes. The son of Ahasuerus.
There we go.
The Median. So Darius, the
Ahasuerus.
Median. Not to be confused, please, with Darius the First. They are two different people. So, Darius. Chapter 5 is when we see Belshazzar booted. Belshazzar dies, and that's when the Persian Empire actually comes into play. By chapter 9, we're in the first year of Darius. And in chapter 11, where are we?
We're
Chapter 11.
Chapter 11, verse 1.
First year of Darius the Mede.
Yeah, so we're still there. We're still in the same spot. So chapter 10, or chapter 11, I'm sorry, fits very conveniently after chapter 5 and somewhere after chapter 9, but we're just not sure how far apart. I mean, they could be months, they could be almost a year, we don't know.
But before 10?
But before 10, because 10
Is
is
the third
the
year.
third year. Yeah. Yes. I know, guys, I didn't write it this way. I would have written it in order, and it would have made sense. Alrighty, so where is Daniel standing?
Oh, the chapter we're in.
We have to go back for that. We have to go back to
it's
Daniel
on
chapter
the
10.
banks of the Eula.
Yes, or the Tigris River. On the banks of the Tigris River, which would be in Persia. And the Tigris River, yes, it does still exist. In chapter 7, where is he standing? I ask all the crazy questions. Don't I?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of anticipate these questions you're going to ask. What chapter?
Chapter 7.
That's when he saw the 4 beasts and
Yes,
everything.
coming
so-
up.
Coming up out of the sea.
Yeah,
Right.
so he was, I don't know.
Coming up out of the sea, and what sea would that be?
The Euphrates River.
The Euphrates River. Which is also by chapter 11, is also in Persia. The Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Alrighty, now I'll ask really easy questions.
Okay.
What was given to Daniel in chapter 10:1? What was given to Daniel?
A vision.
A vision or a message?
Yeah.
And what kind of message was it?
Prophetic.
Future
Right, but he says it's a what? It's one of great what?
distress.
Distress or conflict. And who was it a message about? Or a message for, but it was for Daniel. But who was it going to be about?
It's always about the,
It's in the, about the
Hebrew,
last days.
the Jewish people.
The Jewish people, Daniel's people, which would have been the Jewish people. And then we came across this, and I think I have it on your yellow papers. Like I said, I usually write this stuff down, and I do, it's at the bottom. These abominations of desolations. Now this abomination The shakus, it's a really, really strong word. It's actually the strongest word in the Hebrew language that can mean something like really horrible, like really detestable, really, really horrible, but is actually always used only in reference to idolatry. It's not used for any other thing except to reference idolatry. Just like when Antiochus Epiphanes set up Zeus in the temple, the idol Zeus, that would have been an abomination. That would have been the worst kind of detestable thing that ever could have happened as far as Hebrew language goes. And it always has to do with that idol worship. And the desolation, the shaman, is to be so appalled by what you're seeing that it really affects, it affects you outwardly. Like you can tell when someone is so appalled at something. And so it's this outward appearance of what you're feeling inside. So it's an inward action or an inward attitude that shows like on your face because you saw something. So this abomination of desolation, it has to do with some kind of idol or idolatrous worship that is so absolutely horrible that when people see it, they're shocked and they're horrified by it. They're absolutely shocked. And we know it has to do with idol and idol worship because that's the shakus. That's all it really deals with. So if we go back just a little bit, and I'll read it for you so you guys don't have to keep flipping back and forth. In chapter 8, verse 19, he said, and that would be Gabriel, "Behold, I'm going to let you know what will occur at the final period of the indignation, for it pertains to the appointed time at the end."
Of the end.
Of the end. The time of the end of indignation refers to whose indignation? Who has this indignation? No.
Is it about Alexander the Great and the
No,
broken horn?
no, it is about the Jewish people, but whose indignation is it? Whose indignation is going to end? It's God's. It's God's indignation, and it's going to end with the Jewish people. Why would God be indignant with the Jewish people at this point in time? Why would God be indignant?
Because of their sin.
Yeah, because of their sin. Their idolatry, their sin, their rebellion. That's what got them in this predicament in the first place. Was their absolute just refusal to obey. I mean, it was just, they wouldn't give the land their Sabbath. That's why they ended up 70 years. But it was because of their idol worship. And it was through the leadership. I mean, they just had these kings after kings after kings. And the northern kingdom went first. Israel went first. And yet Judah never learned. Judah saw them go. They knew why they went. And they learned nothing. Because they continued. And so God finally he took them out. Which was exactly what he said was going to happen to do. So, when God's indignation will come to an end, and with it will come the appointed time of the end. The end of what? What's going to end at that appointed time of the end?
The world as we know it.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I wrote down. The world as we know it, it's going to end.
I looked at your notes.
You did? Did Oscar shoot them to
Should've made a
you?
copy.
So yeah, the world as we know it is going to end. So this context of this phrase, the final period, or the period of the end, is exactly the vision that Daniel had about the king who came from those 4 minor kingdoms. Remember those four horns, and the one that shot out was Alexander the Great. He broke off, 4 horns came up. So history tells us exactly who that little horn is, and the small horn, and who was that small horn.
The Antichrist?
Nope, that's the other horn, that's the little horn. The small horn that came up from the 4 horns came out of,
Alexander the Great.
was Alexander, but who is he talking about? History tells us that it's who? That this final period, this indignation, this abomination of desolations was going to be caused by who? We talked about it last week. The great Antiochus Epiphanes.
Oh.
The great Antiochus Epiphanes. It said the small horn tramples many, and that included Antiochus Epiphanes going into Israel. Remember we talked about every time Antiochus Epiphanes was defeated by someone in history, typically Egypt, he would just go back to Israel and just like decimate it. And then when he tried to go with Syria, he would go back down to Israel, because Israel was perfectly placed between Syria and Egypt. They were smack in the middle. So you kind of had to keep going back and forth if you're going to keep having war. And so they were literally the man in the middle. So, the small horn, if that pertained to the end, then the vision of Daniel 8 was foreshadowing what would come at the end. Because we know Antiochus Epiphanes happened. We know he's gone. We know the Maccabean period. We talked about the Maccabean War. We know that happened. We know that there was an abomination of desolation during that time when Antiochus Epiphanes set up the idol of Zeus, when he sacrificed the pig on the altar, when he told them they could do no more Torah learning. He burned the Torah, and he turned a lot of people away from God, and he turned a lot of apostasy. There was a lot of apostasy at that point. And so, he gave favors to the people who apostatized. And then this band rose up. But if this person in Daniel 8 is talking about the time of the end, has the world ended?
No.
Not yet.
No, obviously not, because the world is still as we know it. It's still full of sin and full of rebellion, and I don't see Jesus. So yeah, so it hasn't ended yet. So what we see, I don't know how you guys aren't hot. So what we see is the short-term, what I call the short-term fulfillment, which would be a type of what the end-time king will actually be like. He will look and do a lot of the same things that Antiochus Epiphanes did. Does that make sense? Maybe, sort of? Yep. Yay. And that indignation I have on your paper is anthropomorphic. It's the principle of God's anger applied to human emotions, and it's applied to the motivations of God, like God was irritated. So you apply like common human traits to something that's not human. And we know that God has emotions. We know that. But his indignation will not be like our indignation. Basically, we're trying to describe God's attributes the best that we can according to what we know and, like our own attributes.
Where did this big word come from?
Anthropomorphic.
That thing?
It's not anthropomorphic.
No, it's anthropomorphic. It's anthropopathite. Yeah, it's that big word. It came from, I don't know, I had it written down on the side of my Bible. It came from like right there.
Say that to many times.
So, yeah, say that.
That is a big word.
And then the cross references to that. And then I also had the stuff about the apostasy. And I gave you, I think, a few weeks ago, actually, some extra scriptures about what apostasy really is. It's not necessarily a full denial of Jesus, but it's a full denial of biblical truths. And so it's a departure from truth that one professes to have. Is that falling away? And I've got many cross-references there, which I've put some of them on your paper. So it's not necessarily a turning from God or from Jesus. It's just turning away from biblical truths. I mean, do we not see apostasy even in our churches today? Yeah, we do. We can say it. It's the truth. So, someone want to read Daniel chapter, we're back to Daniel chapter 11, all the way at the end by verse 30, not by, but read verse 35, please.
And some of those of understanding shall fall, to refine them, purify them, and make them white until the time of the end, because it is still for the appointed time.
Right, and we talked about last week how we had verse 35, up until verse 35, that had already happened in history. We can look at history and we can really just look at the prophecies and go right down through history and see how they were fulfilled. Starting in verse 36, that's the end time. That's the time that hasn't come yet. This appointed time, the time of the end. And we just so happen to be living right here. Here we are. This is the present time. We are living between verses 35 and 36. And how much time is it going to be? We do not know. Only God knows. But that's where we're living.
So how long have we been there?
I think we've been there since probably, well, if you go by this, it would be the end of Antiochus, right?
Yeah.
So that
And
was.
so we've been there in 167. So we've been there since December 16th, 167 BC, when he decimated or desecrated the temple. Or it could have been when he died. Could have been then too, in like 150, I
So
forget.
roughly a little less than 2,200 years.
Yeah, and we're still waiting him because we don't know when verse 36 is going to happen. So that's where we're living. We're living between 35 and 36. That's where we're living. Alrighty. I have to find out where I am now. The indignation at the end time is focused on Israel because of their rebellion against God, His covenant, His commands, His ordinances. And the time of the end, the verse 36 end, will also, His indignation is focused on who? Do you think it changes focus from Israel to the rest of the world? I don't either.
No,
I don't either.
because we'll be raptured.
He's
And he's
stuck
gonna,
on that rapture
and he's
thing.
gonna
Oh,
deal.
he is.
Well, he's gonna turn his full attention back to his Jewish, to his,
His people.
his people.
But let me ask you this then. Are we not included in that as believers because we're grafted into the covenant? So then would that also not include our indignation with us?
I hope so.
I do too. I do too. Otherwise, we're not going anywhere. Otherwise, we'd be stuck here. So I think so. I think it absolutely includes us because we're grafted in through the new covenant. So we're grafted into His commands, to His ordinances, to His statutes, and to His covenants. So absolutely. I absolutely believe it. And I sure hope so. Otherwise, we're not leaving. So this final indignation is when this king will overpower, prevail over the saints for that time and times and half a time, that 3.5 years. And we know it hasn't come, but it will at some appointed time that we don't know. So after Antiochus Epiphanes set up the first abomination of desolation, there's going to come another king, and we know Daniel 11, Antiochus Epiphanes, he actually set it up on 12/16 of 167 BC. That was the first abomination of desolations. We know that in Revelation there's going to be another abomination of desolation set up because another king will come just like a type of king like Antiochus Epiphanes. So we're going to have a repeat in Revelation. And we don't know when that's going to be because we're not there yet. We're not to 36 yet in our lives. We're still between 35 and 36. But was or is there going to be, or has there been, another abomination of desolation between these two? I'm not saying another Antiochus Epiphanes necessarily, but has there been another abomination of desolations? And if there has, how many have there been? So we're going to look, our book brought us to the Mark.
Well, the total destruction of the temple. will be
Chapter
nice.
13. So if you'll flip, that's where our homework brought us, to Mark chapter 13. Starting in verse 13. I'm sorry, starting in verse 3 through 33. I went through all of Mark chapter 3, and I thought, this has nothing to do with the abomination of desolations. I don't know what they're talking about. And then I realized I was reading the wrong thing.
I just.
Yeah, okay, Mark
So-
13:33.
Yes, which was in our, that was
That
part
was
of
our homework, yeah.
part of our homework. So, in here, Jesus told Peter, James, who was not really named James, he was either Judah or Jacob, he was not named James, John and Andrew, that the temple was going to be destroyed. And they had a lot of questions for him. And the first question they asked is, when? When is this going to happen? When are these things going to happen? What will it be a sign when these things are going to all be fulfilled? So they want to know when. Because they just left the temple. They were looking at the temple, and Jesus says it's going to be desecrated. It's going to be gone. And they're like, really? When? When is our temple going to be gone? And the repeated phrase in here is, don't be misled. Jesus constantly tells, don't be misled. Don't be frightened. Things are going to happen, but don't be misled because this is not the end. Bad things are going to happen. And if you look in verses 5 through 8, what are some of the things that are going to happen?
Wars, rumors of wars.
Yeah,
Trouble,
lots of trouble.
persecution.
Famines.
War, nation rising up, kingdoms rising up, earthquakes, natural disasters, but those are only the
Birth pains.
beginning of the birth pains. It's not the end, it's the beginning. But we can look back. Have there been wars?
Yes.
Yeah. Have there been rumors of wars? Yeah. Have we had famines? Have we had persecutions? Have we had
Earthquakes.
nations rising up and kingdoms rising up? Well, yeah, we have. And obviously, that doesn't mark the end because we're all still here. And Jesus hasn't come again. So that's not the end, that's the beginning. Well, it seems to me like the beginning was way back from the beginning and it's just not ending yet.
The beginning is still beginning.
Yeah, it's still beginning. And, Solomon said there's nothing new under the sun. There have always been wars and there have always been rumors of wars. In verses 9 through 13, he talks specifically to his disciples, to his Talmudim. And he says, look, you're going to be persecuted by your own people. I was persecuted, you're going to be persecuted. But regardless of how people treat you, regardless of what your family thinks, what your friends think, what your countrymen think, your job is to do what? In spite of it all.
Endure
Yeah, endure
to the end.
to the end. Preach the gospel, endure to the end. And then in verse 14 it says, but when you see the abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, then those who are in Judah are to flee to the mountains. Daniel is told that that's exactly where the abomination of desolations is going to be set up, where it doesn't belong. Well, where do idols not belong?
The temple.
In the temple. Antiochus Epiphanes, where did he set up the idol? In the temple. At the end time, this king is going to set up an idol where? In the temple or in the synagogue. He's going to set it up. So, was there a time? Oh, he also says that during this time, this generation who sees this stuff happening won't pass away until he comes. But nobody knows when he's going to come, when that's going to be. Not even Jesus, only God knows. So obviously, Antiochus Epiphanes wasn't the end. Because, that generation is gone, been gone.
That happened before he
Exactly,
said this.
exactly. So that generation is gone. So the generation that sees this abomination of desolation will not pass away until he comes. In the book of Revelation, when it finally comes, we talked some about this last week. Are we going to have to try to somehow fit and force the puzzle pieces together when this last abomination of desolation happens?
No.
No, we're not. If we are still here to see it, it will be very glaring and we're going to know it. And it's not going to be just the Al-Aqsa Mosque on top of the Temple Mount. That's not what it's going to be, obviously. So, verse 19, I have a question. In verse 14, it says, when you see. Is that a literal you for the disciples, or is that just some kind of arbitrary, at some point in time, you all out there? What do you think?
You all out there.
You think?
Mm-hmm.
So are you attributing this, verse 14, this abomination of desolation, to Revelation, to the final?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Anybody else?
No, I think it's for all you out there.
For all of you out there? So you think it's
Yeah.
Revelation also? So you think it's the end time Revelation? So when all of you guys see this, who does he tell to flee?
The Jews.
Yeah, the Jews. So where's this abomination of desolation going to be set up?
And
Temple.
Yeah, in Jerusalem, somewhere in a
The holy
temple.
place in
Right,
Jerusalem.
that isn't there yet, because there's no temple in Jerusalem.
well, and he
But
just
I mean,
told
they
them the
still have
previous
their
temple's
holy
gonna be down
Right, it's gonna
anyway.
be gone, and so obviously, if it's gone, something has to be rebuilt again, and it's not been rebuilt. And so he says, you men of Judah, yeah, run to the mountains, I mean, run. Why does he tell them to run? What good would it do to run?
Isn't there a period of hiding?
Yeah, people are hiding in caves and stuff in Revelation, yes.
Petra.
There's that, there's a period of time.
Sarah's here.
Oh, it's Sarah.
Yes,
Okay.
Sarah's here, that's what, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if it's 3.5 years, you're just lay low and, I read that in Isaiah or something.
Okay, find it, if you can find it, and
Yeah.
read it to us. So why would they run? Why at the end time, when they see this abomination of desolation set up, why would they run?
Because, to save themselves, because Jesus hasn't come back yet to met justice.
Okay. Could they be running to escape the influence? So that they're not ones that turn away
Makes
from
sense.
God or from their teachings?
Well, it does say flee from sin, so flee from,
I mean, that could be one. It's just, yeah, to flee to save themselves physically. It could be they're running to flee so that they're not under this influence. Because you think if they're hiding in the mountains, in my brain it's like in the caves,
Yeah.
you know,
it's
just
to
get out
take
of the city.
refuge, to
And
hide from danger or whatever,
Yeah, that's-
persecution or.
but more danger, I see what you're saying, more danger in the sense that you can apostatize or maybe get influenced by it.
But I mean,
Yes.
if they're setting up this image in the temple, then they're probably gonna demand that people worship
right,
this thing. So in order not to do that, you're gonna have to get away.
right, yeah, you're going to have to run. Exactly.
It's like fleeing Satan.
Right, the Essenes. The Essenes did that
Yeah.
in Jesus' time. The Qumran community did that. They got out so that they could be their own entity, so that they could, you know, keep the Torah, what they considered, you know, uninfluenced, I guess, by the world. So yeah, they could be running, because if you think about to Antiochus Epiphanes, those boys, those Maccabeans, they fled to the mountains. And they fled to the mountains with the people who had not apostatized, who were getting ready to go to war to take back Jerusalem. So there's just a lot of parallelisms between Daniel 11 and Antiochus Epiphanes, and then that end time king. And so I just read that and I was like, wow, I wonder what are they running from? What are they going to run from? But I think you guys, I mean, hit the nail on the head. I think that's exactly right. Because we're told there's going to be false prophets, there's going to be false messiahs, showing signs and wonders. I mean, we see it in Daniel 11 and 12. We see it again in Revelation 13. And after the tribulation, which begins with the abomination of desolations, the Son of Man is going to come in the clouds, praise God, with great glory and great power. He's going to gather his elect from everywhere. And this is when the stone hits that statue in Daniel 2. And the earthly kingdoms are destroyed. So, any questions? We just kind of ran right through Mark. But any questions about how these scriptures in Mark verses 3 through 33 have to do with Daniel? Did you find it in Isaiah?
No.
Okay. So, any questions? All right, then they made us go backwards to Matthew 23, starting in 37, and then to 24, verse 1, if I'm right. In 24:1, what's really interesting, it says that Jesus came out of the temple and he was going away. When his disciples came up and pointed to the temple. Matthew 24:1, this is the last recording of Jesus in the temple. He left the temple and he never returned again. Until everyone says, back from 118, Psalm 118, it says, I'm trying to find it. When he says that he will not come again until everyone says, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. That's 23:39. Till everybody says, Baruch haba Hashem Adonai. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And this is actually Psalm 118 is what they read during Sukkot, which is the Feast of Tabernacles. So blessed is he who... Yeah. Okay. So, he says the temple will be left desolate. And this pretty much is just a recap of what they said in Mark. But my question is, again, has this happened? Has the temple, since Antiochus Epiphanes, has it been demolished and destroyed? Yeah, it has. By a man named Titus in 70 AD. And when Titus destroyed the temple, he actually built another temple on top of it, and I believe it was also to Zeus. But he built a great temple right on top of where the old temple was. And that's why only the western wall is standing. And that would have been Herod's temple.
So you're saying that was an abomination of desolation?
I believe it was, yes. Because he again set up, even though it wasn't literally set up in the temple because he burned it. I mean, it was burned to the ground.
Destroyed it, yeah.
But he still built a temple and put idols in it in Jerusalem, and he kicked all the Jews out, and they were scattered. And during this time, there were false messiahs, and there were also false prophets. There were so many false messiahs. I mean, they all were proven false because they died, typically in battle. They all died. One false messiah, his dad actually killed him because he said he couldn't take the blasphemy anymore, and he was leading all these other people astray. So one false messiah, his dad actually killed him. You think of the Jewish people running up. They fled during this time, and they fled to the mountains. They fled to Masada, the great, holdout, the great stronghold that Herod built because he was so paranoid about his family killing him. He built this amazing palace called Masada, and it actually had places in it that were cold enough that it could store food, for years. It could store food. And so that's where they ran. And it took a really long time because they had the high ground before the Romans were actually able to capture Masada. And this is the part, I don't know if it's true or not, but I mean, all that's true. But they said that everyone, rather than being taken back down into slavery, they went ahead, committed mass suicide, except for one lady who had gathered 2 little children with her, and she fled out kind of the back door. And that's how we know about Masada. That part, I don't know if it's true or not, but I do know that they found them and they were all dead. And it took them I want to say 3 years or more, that they were able to hold out in Masada until they built one of those ramps, those big earthen ramps that they could bring up their machines on, their war machines on. So they did flee to the mountains. There were false prophets and there were false messiahs. So this looks a lot like what happened in Daniel, and it looks like what's going to happen in Revelation. Different. I'm not saying he's a type of Antiochus Epiphanes, but it did happen. So I count that as another abomination of desolation. I can't say for sure, but that's kind of how I see it.
Well, do you think the people at that time thought that was going to be, that was the end of, that Jesus was coming back after this?
They could have, but I think so only in the fact that they were so eager to follow all these different false messiahs. I mean, all through this period, there are so many false messiahs claiming, follow me, follow me. They were warmongers. I mean, they typically took them to war to get Jerusalem back. So, I mean,
Well, yeah.
so I think they were just so desperate for Messiah to come and for them to have peace, because now their temple had been desecrated yet again. That I believe, I think they would have probably, in desperation, believed pretty much anything. And so they did. So, and that was the big diaspora when the Jewish people were kicked out. And that's actually, what's very interesting about that is this is where it wasn't until they were booted out after 70 AD that really we start seeing rabbinical Judaism, or canonical Judaism, but it's rabbinical Judaism, modern Judaism, actually being written down and canonized, because they have no temple to go to anymore. So they have no rabbis, they have no priests. So how are they going to continue their beliefs and their culture if there's no one to learn it from? And so a lot of rabbis kind of set up little schools, kind of on the outskirts, and try to get Talmudim, try to get disciples in to teach them in various parts, but even those weren't real cohesive, like what this person was teaching, this person, and so they really decided, this oral history that we've had up until now, we really kind of need to get these sages together, we need to get these wise men together, and these rabbis together, and we really need to start writing all this stuff down, so that we can have a canonized, everybody's kind of on the same page sort of a thing. That didn't happen until sometime in the 6th century AD. However, canonical Christianity actually was kind of blooming and taking root by the mid-3rd century. So then begs the question, this is just kind of a lanyard extra, did Christianity, as we think modern Christianity, come out of Judaism, or did modern Judaism actually come out of this Christian movement of Christianity? If you look at when the religions were sort of canonized and sort of organized, Judaism came out of Christianity. Which is, I know, when I heard that I thought, that's really weird, but it does make a lot of sense, because there had to be a break from that ancient faith of Israel, which Messianic Judaism was part of that. So there was this big break, and there's a whole bunch of history behind it, and of course it never happened in a day. I mean, this took, centuries and centuries, right? But canonical Christianity actually came before rabbinical Judaism as far as being written down as two separate entities. So I just thought that was really, that was interesting. So, okay, now I have to figure out where we are. Yes. I don't know how you guys are dying. Oh my gosh.
It's getting warm up here now.
Well, it's 68.
But it does not feel 68 in this room.
Pretty warm.
This room is always hot, except in the summer, then you freeze. Okie dokie. So, Matthew 24, verse 3. Does anyone want to read that for us?
As he was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things happen? And what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?"
Now the end is what I've written up here. It's to complete, it's to bring together for an anointed purpose. So when is all of this going to come together? When, this appointed time, when is this going to happen? But I find it interesting that they said, tell us what will be the sign of your coming. Jesus hadn't gone anywhere.
He hadn't gone anywhere
No,
yet.
Jesus is sitting in front of them. He'd been with them for almost 3.5 years, but they want to know what's going to be a sign. How do we know you're going to come back? And what is this end of the age going to look like? So yeah, I just thought it's, and that your coming is actually, it means his arrival, but it's the series of events. They want a nice, neat little outline of what's going to happen before Jesus comes back again, when he hasn't gone anywhere. And then when he actually does, die, he's crucified and he's buried and he rises from the dead
At this
again.
point, do they know he's gonna be crucified?
They know, but do they really get
Do
it?
they really, they don't got it.
No, I don't think so
I don't think
at
they
all.
realize he's gonna be gone.
I don't think so either.
But he says so in verse 20, in chapter 23, he says, "For I say to you, from now on, you will not see me
Right.
until you see." So he's telling them again. that
Yeah, from
he's
this
going.
time you're not gonna see me, and they wanna know, okay,
When are you coming
when are you
back?
coming back?
I
Because,
mean, that would be like when you're going downtown, it's like, well, when are you coming back? You know?
yeah, what do you
I don't
have to
think they
do?
Realize he's gonna be gone.
Yeah, when do you know, what do you have to do? What are your events? Because when you finish all those things, then you're gonna be back. Because now you're telling us the temple's gonna be destroyed. It's not gonna be here anymore. No stone will lay upon each other. We're supposed to be running, and fleeing and running out of here. But when are you gonna come back in all of this? I kind of see the same desperity in the disciples as we see in Daniel. Like, hang on a second. We learned that when Messiah came, there would be peace and that we'd have our own nation again. And now you're telling us about things being destroyed and that we need to run away from home, not that we're going to be safe in our home. We need to run away, we need to hide, and you're going to leave us. And you're not going to come back until we say, Baruch haba Shem Adonai, until we say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. And that person would be blessed is he, Jesus, who comes in the name of the Lord. And I can just imagine, and this is just how my weird brain works, that when the temple is decimated by Titus in 70 AD, I could just see, can you see, like anybody that their disciples had told, can you see them just running around going, Baruch atah Adonai, haba Shem Adonai, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, come back, come back, come back, come back. And he doesn't, but then that sets up in the mindset of when all these things happen, I'm going to come back, and then all of these different messiahs start showing up. And it's real easy for us to blame them, but in their desperation, and Jesus said he was going to come, and it's going to be the end of all of this, but now they're running, they're fleeing, they have no temple, they're saying, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord, and all these false messiahs keep showing up. And we kind of say, well, okay, we can understand like the first couple, but I mean, this went on for a really long time. Through generations, did these false messiahs and these false prophets come, and they still believed them. Well, we have people, even today, who are believing in false prophets and false messiahs. So, nothing's really changed. Nothing's really new under the sun. And we have everything. We know what the end's going to look like, and yet people still, in ignorance, they still turned away. Just like is mentioned in Daniel 11, just like is mentioned in Matthew 24, just like is mentioned in Mark, and just like is mentioned in Revelation. So, this abomination of desolation is going to be in a temple in Jerusalem. People of Judah are going to be running. From that time, there says it's going to be a great tribulation. And that great tribulation, because if you look, tribulation is in 9. Great tribulation, which is a megathalipsis, is in 21. So they use thalipsis in 9 and a megathalipsis, this great tribulation, in verse 21. And if you mark, then you may want to mark those two connected together. So there's going to be this great tribulation, which sounds a lot like Daniel 12. So if we go back to Daniel 7, his very first vision of these beasts, I think this is the time of that fourth kingdom king, when he'll war with the saints, and he's going to overpower them for those times and half a time for those 3.5 years. I think this is describing the same time. Anybody think that it's any other time? Because remember, that fourth kingdom is never, ever named.
Right.
Because I think it's the end time revelation king that's going to come as a type of Antiochus Epiphanes, and what he did in the temple. That's going to be this fourth kingdom that is not named. And that, I think, is what trips everybody up. because they want to know who it is, because now there's a bunch of people, kind of guessing who this other kingdom is going to be, where this king is going to come from. But in the middle of the covenant, this covenant week, which would be that 3.5 years, he's going to stop the sacrifices and the offerings, which is mentioned in Daniel chapter 9. It's the time of the king in Daniel 11:36-45, and it's the tribulation against Israel in Daniel chapter 12. And during that time, there's going to be more false messiahs, there's going to be all these false prophets, and then we will see the coming of the true Messiah. We're going to see Jesus' second advent, and that is going to be the end of the tribulation and the great tribulation. So that's just kind of a rundown of how all of this fits together. And these giant puzzle pieces fit together. And this time of the end has been called a lot of things. It's been called the final period of indignation. It's been called the Great Tribulation in Matthew 24. It's been called the Tribulation. It's called the time of the end. It's the last half of that 70th week. And it all centers around who? Around Israel. As a nation, it all centers around Israel. Does anyone have any questions? Because believe it or not, I wanted to leave a lot of time for discussion if we had any.
So this abomination of desolation and the tribulation and the great tribulation is all the same, the time of the end, all this is all the same?
Yes, I believe yes. I believe that it's going to be this abomination of desolation that sets everything in motion, that's going to set off the time of the end.
Okay, because she had us reading all these different scriptures that talked about the time of the end, and it's like, I'm thinking, isn't this all the same thing?
It is. It is. And I
thought,
think,
well, maybe I'm supposed to be getting something else out of this.
no, it is. I believe it is. I believe by reading through the scriptures and by studying them, I believe it is. And I believe that this end time and the way things are going to be set up, kind of scheduled, is that this is what's going to set it off. This final one is what's going to set it off. Because that's what's going to cause people to start fleeing. That's what's going to bring on the Revelation 11. It's that beast that comes out of the dragon that comes out of the sea, and he has his false prophet with him. So there's your false Messiah. There's your false prophet. He pretends to be God.
The unholy trinity.
Yes, but who would be the Holy Spirit?
Well, I don't know, I think it was a K. Arthur thing, that the giving the power to the other one, it's like the Holy Trinity.
Right.
But this is just...
It would be an unholy. Yes.
The unholy Trinity.
Right, because the dragon gives his power.
Right.
To the false prophet. And then the false prophet does all of these, miraculous things. I mean, he's got, the mark that's been healed, and he causes people to worship the dragon, and, and then we start talking about marks, and I think the marks are not, what we can even imagine. I think it's more like, whose side are you on? There's a lot of markings that go on in the book of Revelation, and it's not just 666. There's a lot of people who are marked in different ways, and there are people who are marked for God, and there are people who are marked for Satan or for the dragon. So it's really going to show whose team are you really on, is what those marks are going to be. I believe in reading.
Okay, I'm still confused about the times, like the 3.5 years and the 3.5 years and those 70 weeks and all that. It's like, that still boggles my mind.
Alrighty.
I have a question. Where is the Dome of the Rock located at?
The Dome of the Rock, isn't it on the Temple Mount, on the opposite side of the Al-Aqsa Mosque?
So what I'm saying is that not an abomination?
Which one? The Dome of the Rock or the Al-Aqsa Mosque?
Well, I don't
The
know.
mosque
I don't know
on the
what-
mosque on the
The
Temple
mosque is
Rock.
right. Is
On the
is
Temple
the
Mount
that's
is-
where the Muslim. That's what the temple's called. It's the Al-Aqsa Mosque is what's on top of there. And actually, devout Jewish people and rabbis are not even supposed to go up on the top of the Temple Mount, because they're not sure where the Holy of Holies would have been. And since you're not allowed to go in there without, like the blood of the red heifer, you're not allowed to go in there, then since they don't know where it was, then they won't go up on top at all. And which was interesting because I had a professor who's a rabbi in Israel who said he would actually like to go and look and see, because you can take tours in the mosque. And he would love to go up there, but because they aren't sure where the Holy of Holies is exactly, then he's not allowed up there, which I found very interesting. But.
Well, so then you still didn't answer the question.
Oh, do I think that's an abomination? I think it is a abomination, but I don't think it is.
Well, I don't think it is
right.
but I'm saying that it is an abomination.
I believe it is, yeah. Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. And it's where it shouldn't be.
Right.
Which is how it's described. When Jesus even said, when you see it, this abomination of desolation, where it's not supposed to be, in Mark. And where it's not supposed to be is in the temple. But I think it's an abomination. It shouldn't be there. But I don't think it's this abomination of desolations because it's not literally in the temple. It's on top of the mountain that was flattened, or built up actually, to put, the temple on, and it's not just in the temple. All right, 70 weeks. We talked about 70 weeks. Could be, well, we talked about 7, could be years, days, months, whatever. So, we have in these 7, it's broken up into 3.5 and 3.5. Right? Because we only have times, and half a time.
All right, I get that.
Right. And the time of the covenant is going to be for 70 weeks. Right? This time of this covenant. Or 7 years, I'm sorry. But he's going to break it in half. So he's going to break this covenant that's made, this covenant of peace, this false covenant, is going to be broken in half, which again gives us 3.5 years. It is, I want to make sure I say this exactly correct because I get mixed up on all these horns. Is it not, it's one of the kings of the north of the south, is it not? No. Oh, gosh.
I'm looking at her chart here, this prophetic overview of Daniel.
Okay, yes, it's in my book, yes.
Yeah, I'm looking at that and I'm trying to figure this out,
I don't think this is going...
The 3.5 years, it says prince makes the covenant.
Right. But I think all of this is fourth kingdom stuff.
Messiah, the prince enters Jerusalem.
I think all of this is fourth kingdom stuff. All of this is going to happen because really if you look at history, the first 3 kingdoms, Persia, well actually I guess 4, but Babylon, the Medo-Persians, and the Greeks have already happened. Those are done. We only have the fourth kingdom left. A lot of people claim that the fourth kingdom is Rome. Because Rome came in, of course, Titus was Roman who set up or destroyed the temple and kicked the Jewish people out of Jerusalem. I don't think that that's the fourth kingdom. I think the fourth kingdom is an end time kingdom. Because I think if the fourth kingdom had a name, then it would be somewhere in Daniel. Then it would have been named. Because other kingdoms were named that weren't in existence. Like Greece was not a nation. Greece wasn't a kingdom. Greece wasn't an empire. Greece was a nothing. But yet he named them. And so I do believe that this fourth kingdom is not Rome. I think it may be a Rome-esque, maybe, as far as the persecutions go, but I don't think it's going to be Rome. And I don't even think it's going to be Rome-esque because if you look at Rome,
so anyway, this is a king that comes as a result of this fourth kingdom.
Yes, I think it's the
That's
king
who's
of the
making
fourth
this
kingdom.
covenant.
Yes,
Okay.
the prince. Yes,
All right.
Yes. And remember, we also learned that a prince could be a person, but it can also be an angel.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when you look at Satan, you know, as the dragon coming up out of the sea, I don't think it's going to be, we may look at him and he may look like a human being, but I don't think he's actually going to be a, you know, born of this earth human being. I think it's going to be more of a behind the veil, you know, prince that's coming out. And I look at, you know, when Gabriel showed up to Daniel, you know, and he looked in the image of a man. He even describes Jesus as looking as one of a son of man. So I think this person will definitely look like a human being, and I think that's how a lot of people are going to be fooled by him, because he'll look human and have these kind of otherworldly powers. But he's not going to be an earthly born human being. I believe he's going to be a demon, basically.
So this abomination of desolation is going to start in the middle of this 7
I think it's what starts it off. I think it's at the very beginning.
beginning of the 70.
Yeah, I think it's what sets it off. Yes,
Okay.
this 7 years. I think it's what starts it off. Because, one second, I'm going to find it. It says, when you see this, know that the abomination of or from this point on, it'll be, I've marked abomination of desolations, and I've got to find it. I'm so sorry. See, I should have anticipated you guys' questions, and I wasn't good at it. Or maybe it was it in Matthew or Mark?
You said Matthew.
I thought, okay. Then he said, when you see the abomination of desolation. In Mark 13:14, it says, when you see this abomination of desolation standing where it should not be, then those who are in Judah are supposed to flee. And then it says, for those, down in 19, it says, for those will be a time of tribulation, such as not occurred since the beginning of creation, which God created until now and never will again.
Okay, so that's the Great Tribulation begins then.
Yes, I think that's when it starts.
Okay,
That's
so
what
then
makes it.
when they make this covenant in the middle of after 3.5 years, they
Yes.
make the covenant.
Well,
And that-
I think the covenant is also at the beginning, because he breaks it after 3.5 years.
okay,
So I think a lot of things happen like kind of right on top of each other. So I think we had this abomination of desolations in the temple, of course, in Israel, but he wants to make a covenant, this fake covenant with Israel, because he's now set up an idol in the temple. So he's got to kind of do something, you know, to keep them from rioting and stuff, or to keep them from running out. So I think he makes this covenant of peace, but I think that covenant then is broken after that 3.5 years.
and then things get really ugly.
And then things get really, really ugly, yes. And then that's, I believe, when the Great Tribulation starts. And so I happen to believe that we'll be there for the first half, but we will be out of there before the second half, before the Great Tribulation. And then, of course, it says after the tribulation, down in 24, the sun will be dark, the moon, and that's when the Son of Man will come on clouds with great power and glory. And then that will usher in, of course, the Messianic kingdom, or the 1,000-year millennium. And at the end of that, you know, Satan will come out again, and not for very long, he'll come up against God. God will whoosh him out of there with fire from heaven, and it'll be done. And then we will tabernacle with God forever.
I really like this prophetic overview, Daniel. That just really puts it all in.
I love that. I love the reading she did last week that really
Yeah.
explained the history of it. It really helps to kind of take this and really make it make sense, because I'm a chart person. So I like things visually that make sense. So any other questions, anything, because I'm about to probably ruin your week, like right now. All right, in addition to your homework that you have in your book, what I'd like you to do, and some of it actually does occur in your homework, but what I want you to do is I want you to compare the small horn, which is going to be in Daniel 8, to the little horn, which is going to be in Daniel 7. Because do you think that they are the same people? Do you think they are different people? Where do you think they come from? But really, there's not a whole lot in Scripture about them, but just go by what Scripture tells you about this little horn in chapter 7, and then the small horn in chapter 8. And I think, like I said, I think she does a little bit with that in our homework, but I'm not real positive. And so this was just written down as extra homework when I first took it. So I thought, hey, you
Pass
know,
it on.
you all might enjoy a little extra homework, right? Don't we all? And then we'll make sure we discuss this next week. Oh my goodness gracious. Any other questions at all? If you all know anybody who would like to study Ezekiel with us, I'm passing out books here next week, but if they don't come for day, I would expect them to come like, 38 weeks, like 18 weeks into a study, and they probably, their heads would blow up and we'd never see them again. But if you know somebody who's not in here who wants to take Ezekiel with us, just let me know and I'll bring the books on Sunday so that they can have them, so that when we start, they're not behind a week of homework.
My shirt.
Oh no, what have you been working